I met Ryan when we were kids, long before I understood the weight of unspoken feelings. We were inseparable, two halves of a whole, bound by inside jokes, late-night gaming marathons, and an unshakable loyalty that made it seem like nothing could ever come between us. He was everything I wasn't, effortlessly confident, magnetic in a way that drew people toward him without trying. And I was the quiet one, always standing just outside the spotlight he so naturally commanded. Even as we grew older, the bond remained unbreakable. Through high school, we navigated life's chaos together. Football games, first heartbreaks, whispered secrets in the dead of night. He was straight. He dated girls, laughed about his crushes, asked for advice on what to text them. I gave him that advice, forcing myself to smile, pretending it didn't twist something deep inside me. I never told him. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the quiet understanding that some things were better left unsaid. I valued what we had more than the fantasy of something more. But unspoken feelings have a way of creeping into the spaces between words, into the glances held a second too long, the lingering warmth of a casual touch. And whether he noticed or not, I felt it, an invisible thread pulling me closer to something I knew I could never have. Ryan never questioned why I never talked about girls, never teased me about being single. If he had suspicions, he never voiced them. I told myself that was a mercy. The day it all changed was just another ordinary day. Ryan had crashed at my place the night before after a long weekend of video games and bad takeout. It wasn't unusual. He had a key, came and went as he pleased. My house had always been his second home, just like his had been mine. Morning light filtered through my curtains as I dragged myself to the bathroom, groggy and half asleep. The hot water was a welcome relief, steam curling around me as I let my thoughts drift. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear the footsteps. It happened in an instant, a sharp intake of breath, the unmistakable creak of the floor. My head snapped toward the sound, heart seizing in my chest. And there he was. Ryan stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide with something unreadable, shock, embarrassment, maybe something else. For a moment, neither of us moved. Time fractured, stretching impossibly thin between us. Then, just as quickly as it happened, he turned on his heel and disappeared, the door slamming shut behind him. I stood there, water beating against my skin, pulse hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Something had shifted, and I knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even with the sound of water crashing around me, I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Ryan was gone, but his presence lingered like an imprint burned into the air. I gripped the edge of the shower wall, breath uneven, mind racing through a dozen different possibilities. Had he seen too much? Did it even matter? Wrapping a towel around my waist, I stepped out, each movement deliberate and cautious, as if the very air between us had become fragile. I half expected him to be gone by the time I emerged, to find an empty house and a hastily typed text message explaining some flimsy excuse for his abrupt departure. But he was still there. Ryan sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. His jaw was tight, his fingers laced together so forcefully his knuckles had turned white. He didn't look up when I entered the room. I hesitated, standing at the threshold between the hallway and the living room, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with my bare skin. "You good?" My voice came out rougher than intended, like I'd swallowed gravel. Ryan exhaled a slow, controlled breath. "Yeah." A beat of silence. Then, "Didn't mean to walk in on you." The air between us was dense, thick with something neither of us dared to name. I searched his face for a sign, for anything that might tell me what was going through his mind. But Ryan had never been easy to read when he didn't want to be. I forced a chuckle, the sound brittle and unnatural. "You've seen me shirtless a million times, dude. No big deal." He finally looked up, and for the first time I saw it. The flicker of something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not embarrassment, not amusement. Something deeper, something raw. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then stopped. A moment stretched between us, thick and weighted, teetering on the edge of something dangerous. Then, just as quickly, he shook his head and stood. I should go. A cold prickle ran down my spine. Ryan. But he was already moving, grabbing his keys from the table, his movements too quick, too forced. Like he was running. From me. From whatever had just passed between us. I didn't try to stop him. What could I even say? My thoughts were a tangled mess of hope and fear, of wanting something I couldn't name and dreading what it might mean. The door shut behind him, the soft click echoing through the empty space he left behind. I stared at it for a long time, a sinking feeling settling in my chest. Something had shifted, and I had no idea if I should be terrified or relieved. Ryan avoided me for 3 days. No texts, no calls. Just silence. It wasn't like him. We had never gone more than a few hours without talking, even on our worst days. But now, the absence of his voice felt like a gaping wound, raw and exposed. My mind replayed that moment in the living room over and over, dissecting every glance, every hesitation. Had he figured it out? Did he know what I had spent years burying? On the 4th night, I caved. I found him where I knew he'd be, sitting on the hood of his car at the overlook just outside town, a place we'd gone 100 times before. Only this time, he wasn't waiting for me. He was avoiding me. He didn't look surprised when I pulled up, didn't even turn his head when I climbed onto the car beside him. The city lights stretched below us, blinking like tiny stars, but the weight between us was heavier than the night sky. "You're avoiding me," I said. Ryan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "I'm not." I let out a humorless laugh. "Really? So you just forgot how to answer your phone?" Silence. I shifted, my fingers gripping the edge of the car hood. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to speak. "Ryan, just say it. Whatever it is, just say it." He hesitated, then sighed. "That day at your place, when I walked in on you." He trailed off, like the words were too big to fit past his lips. I swallowed hard. "It was an accident." "I get it." "That's not," he cut himself off, shaking his head. "Look, man, I've been thinking. About a lot of things. And I don't know how to deal with this." Something inside me twisted. Deal with what? Ryan clenched his jaw. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it, the fear, the uncertainty. The truth he didn't want to say. "You like me, don't you?" The world stopped. Every part of me screamed to deny it, to laugh it off, to say anything but the truth. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I nodded. Ryan let out a breath like I'd just confirmed his worst fear. He dragged a hand through his hair, his body rigid, his expression unreadable. "Man, I don't know how to handle that," he said, voice unsteady. "I mean, we're friends." A sharp, bitter pain coiled in my chest. "Yeah, we are." He shook his head again, like he was trying to shake off a thought he didn't want. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "I told someone." The words hit like a punch to the stomach. I froze. "What?" Ryan looked away. "I didn't mean to, but it just slipped." The betrayal was instant, searing, unforgivable. The night air felt colder after Ryan's words, like the ground beneath me had cracked open, leaving nothing but empty space. My mind struggled to process it, to make sense of how he could take something so deeply personal, something I had barely come to terms with myself, and hand it over to someone else like it was nothing. "Who?" My voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head. "It wasn't on purpose. I was just talking. It slipped. It slipped." I repeated, the words sharp, bitter. "That's my life, Ryan. My secret. You don't get to just slip." He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. And somehow, that made it worse. I stood abruptly, the weight in my chest unbearable. "I trusted you." Ryan finally looked up, his expression torn between regret and something else, something I couldn't name. "I know," he admitted. "And I'm sorry." The apology felt empty. Pointless. What was I supposed to do with it? Pretend this never happened? Pretend I wasn't now vulnerable in a way I never wanted to be? I shook my head. "I have to go." I walked away without looking back. The fallout was immediate. Whispers in the hallways. Curious glances that lingered too long. People I barely knew suddenly had an opinion about me, about something I hadn't even been ready to admit to myself, let alone the world. Ryan tried to fix it, but the damage was done. We stopped speaking. The absence of him in my life was like missing a limb, something I reached for instinctively, only to remember it was no longer there. Days turned into weeks. The sting of betrayal dulled, but never fully faded. I thought about confronting him again, demanding to know why. Why he couldn't have just left things alone. Why he had to ruin the one friendship that meant everything to me. But in the end, I didn't. Because the truth was, I already knew. Ryan had been scared. Maybe not of me, but of what my feelings meant. Of what they could change. He had panicked, and in that panic, he had done something reckless, something selfish. Understanding that didn't make it hurt any less. Months later, I found a message from him in my inbox. Short. Simple. I messed up. I miss you. I stared at it for a long time before typing a response. Then, just as quickly, I deleted it. Some betrayals you can't come back from. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. I had spent too much time hoping Ryan would be the person I wanted him to be, instead of seeing him for who he was. And now, finally, I was ready to move on. I locked my phone, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. For the first time in a long time, I let go.